Internet, hello you absolute lovelies. Let's talk all about Welcome to Derry, Season 1, Episode 1, the pilot for this insane return of Andy Muschietti to the world of It, to the world of Stephen King. I'm going to be diving into every single episode as the show airs. This one's a couple days late because I missed the pilot, but I'll be watching every episode as it airs and have reviews up within a few hours of the actual episode. So please hit that subscription bell if you're not already. I cover movies, I cover TV, and I cover lots and lots of comic books on this channel. I read about 50 to 70 comics a week, and I break down all of the art coming out with that comic book sense in mind. This show especially has a bunch of comic book love. We're going to be talking about that as well as the show itself. So please, subscription bell. Also like this video for the algorithm. Also, most of all, please leave a comment below. I'd love to know what you thought of Episode 1 of Welcome to Derry. That's the power of the internet. I love the conversation we get to have. Water cooler conversation, especially around a weekly release model. I am very excited this show is weekly. Let's dive into Episode 1. Now, this show is an anthology series, meaning it is going to be each episode has its own set of characters. But what's interesting about that is it's going back in time by different decades. So this episode takes place in the 60s. There is a bit more DNA between this and the 80s we obviously got to see in It Chapter 1. What's going to be interesting is the further away from the pilot we get, the further away from modern technology, from our sense of the normal is going to be. So to me, this felt like a beautiful prequel to It Chapter 1. But as we go back, each episode is going to be like a prequel to itself. So we're going to get to see the root of these characters. We're going to get to see a lot of things about the certain key elements of Derry, but we're going to have an ever-changing cast of supporting characters. I think Pennywise, by the end, is going to be the only anchor to this whole thing besides Derry itself. I think that's a fascinating way to do the narrative. Now, this particular episode brought us a lot of characters that really felt like Stephen King characters. It felt sometimes maybe too much like It Chapter 1. Some of the characters were a bit of that same formula. There was a bit of that, like this character equals this character, but to me, I think that's smart for the pilot, and since this is a show that's going to be changing characters at all times, that didn't bother me as much as it might have if this was our overarching arc of characters. If these were the characters we were going to be living with throughout the series, it would be like, wait a second, why'd we just do It again? But instead, I think it's a smart way to connect us, to endear us to them, and then murder them. This show is insanely violent towards children, it's insanely violent in general, but it's merciless because it's going in reverse chronological order, so you need to attach to these characters, and then you need to not know which ones are gonna make it. It does an impressive job of keeping you on your toes because our leads died, 80% of them. Like most of the leads of the show, that if it had a different format, if it was a less malicious show, if it was less of a violent show, would have been our characters to follow. If this was, Super 8 or Stranger Things or any of the other shows that have that Stephen King young kid figuring out sensibility, they wouldn't have murked all these kids. Now, they're also doing that in a way that's going to make each episode individually exciting because there isn't necessarily a final girl or final guy. There isn't necessarily going to be anyone we get to stay attached to because it'll go back decades. So I think this is a really fun format. This individual episode, I was really impressed by the fact that I was as attached to these characters as quickly, that I was endeared to them in an hour or so when they died. I felt it. The character design and the baby demon thing, my God. Pennywise, in his evolutions, what a terrifying entity to take the form of, and what an opening scene of not just one of the most grotesque, violent, intense births, a beautiful thing in real life and a horrific thing to use in horror art, but like that whole scene with that family, that that nuclear family that are so Americana, and the horrors of that. I was, one, impressed at how terrifying they were just in a car, but two, impressed at how much we cared about that kid at the movie theater. Something about endearing you, the viewer, who's probably some level of cinephile, to a kid sneaking into movies, a kid sneaking into horror movies, and then tying that into the button, giving it a bookend of him in the movie to have that horror come out of the screen. All of that because if you're watching this, you're more than likely somewhat of a cinema fan. So I thought it was really smart to make our first lead that dies, that brings us into this world, a cinema fan, make him someone you care about, the black eye, the family, the mess, to have us sympathize with him when he's hiding behind the standee, but then have all of that feel so real and practical, and then at the end go totally impractical, have him being in the movie, have it so supernatural, have him come out of the screen, have all that hauntingness, but have it all tie into a love for movies. I thought that was a really smart first episode. This definitely feels like Andy Muschietti getting to play in his own wheelhouse, but obviously in the world of Stephen King. This is not a direct adaptation of anything. This is him making it chapter 1 and 2, and years later getting to come back to live in the world of Derry. So welcome himself back to Derry. And while it's Andy Muschietti and his wife Barbara Muschietti producing, they are also showing us love letters to things like comics and cinema. So we saw the cinema love in the lead, but we also got a very important character to this episode being a comic book fan, and we got two very important issues brought to us in this episode. We had a Flash issue that is the first introduction of the multiverse. Seems pretty important for a new launching of the DCU from the director who was part of the big multiversal story in the old DCEU, who is currently still attached to make our first Batman in the DCU. And we also got a Batman issue, which was the first appearance of Clayface, and Clayface is going to be canonically a DCU film, which I assume will be our first introduction to the DCU Batman. Now, that isn't necessarily what's going to happen. I do not want to say I know that Batman is in Clayface, but it is a story where it'd be fascinating to have our first introduction to Batman be in an antagonistic role. It'd be a fascinating choice to have Batman introduced in a non-Batman film to launch the DCU, even if it's like a shadowy figure like Creature Commandos. To have our first live-action Batman in the DCU brought in Clayface would be a lot of fun. I think that's what's going to happen as soon as October of next year. And to have this first episode directed by Muschietti have the first appearance of Clayface on the anniversary of Clayface was delightful. What a genius move to have that on the anniversary of the character some 60 years ago. Have that episode airing with that comic book, with the first multiversal comic of the Flash, with just a Detective Comics and a Flash comic. We have a whole narrative in comic books in one juicy episode of Easter eggs. Loved that. Loved the love letter to cinema. Loved that our character brought us through that. What are some other elements I really liked? I really was impressed with the school elements. I liked that the overtone of bullying and the different like group systems and all those things without it feeling like too overdone. You get your sense of Carrie, you get your sense of like the horrors of school, but it doesn't feel like everyone's a caricature. I really like that we had these two friends that were close friends that weren't as close to the kid that got taken away, feeling guilty and feeling remorseful, and one of them more than the other. And it just felt so real. These characters felt very authentically lived in. And then the adults, I love James Remar. His voice is so incredible. I'm so glad he's having this resurgence. Having him as this like military force. And then I don't know that dude, that lead guy. I forget all the characters' names. I watched this at like midnight because I wanted to make this review today. But our lead sergeant and him dealing with racism and bullshit and them making sure that wasn't a thing that was going to happen in the 60s is one, a different side of the 60s than we see of Remar taking care of his guy. But two, I thought it was a really interesting way to endear us to him that will hopefully make him another character in another episode. I hope we see more of him in the 50s and maybe his time at war, his flying, the jet, the story of everything that happened in Korea. I'd love to see more of that. So hoping he might be the tie-in for episodes 1 and 2. Time will tell. Overall, really impressed. I'm getting more into horror. It was a movie I really liked. I credit Black Phone for being the movie that got me back into horror to scale. Like, I will watch horror movies now because of Black Phone. That was only 4 years ago. I loved It, 7 years ago? I went to an It, Chapter 2 panel at Comic-Con for the debut with Conan. Like, I pursued more of It because It was so impressive. And that was before Black Phone. So I didn't start watching horror movies again after It. I thought it might be a flash in the pan. I loved It so much that I was like, I don't want to be dissuaded from other horror, but It Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 really were impressive to me, and I love Muschietti's work, so the stakes for this were pretty high, and I'm really glad it's living up to it. Feels like an HBO show. It feels of quality. It's so good you don't want to be on your phone, which is nice. It also is so smart. It isn't trying to pander to people that are on their phones. It's not doing that thing where it's like, let me narrate this because you're not watching. It's not doing small screen, big screen like a lot of shows and writers are being instructed to do. So really impressed overall at the intelligence, at the acting, at the drama, at the grit, at the gore, at the intensity, at the horrors. And I'm very excited for episode 2, which drops early this week. This episode aired on Sunday, and this next episode will be airing early on Friday for Halloween. So it's going to be a Friday episode 2 debut. So that drops at midnight, 3 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm going to try to stay up. If I fall asleep, I'm going to watch it first thing in the morning and then get you a review up on Halloween itself. Also going to be doing a live stream that day. So lots of stuff coming at you on Halloween. So please stay tuned. And then Sundays after that. So that following Sunday and so on, I'll be covering all of Welcome to Derry. So please subscribe to this page for lots of movie stuff. We're getting into Oscar season, for lots of TV stuff, including this show and whatever else pops off over this holiday season, for lots of comic stuff, weekly live streams, and all of the comic news and reviews you could hope for, all right here on this page. Much love to Andy Muschietti, Barbara Muschietti, and Stephen King for giving us these horrors. Much love for HBO for letting him play in an insane sandbox. Much love for you and to you. For watching my stuff and liking, commenting, and subscribing. We will see you on Friday for episode 2 of Welcome to Derry, as well as lots of other stuff. And I appreciate y'all very much. Like, subscribe, comment, all the jazz. Hug your family. You never know when a crazy clown deity demon creature might steal one of them. It happens. All right. Bye, guys.